The year is 480 BC, and a massive Persian army, said to be more than 1,000,000 strong, is marching straight toward Greece. Standing in their path at a tight mountain pass called Thermopylae are only 300 Spartan warriors led by their king, Leonidas. The Persians send a messenger with a simple demand: give up your weapons and surrender. Leonidas fires back with just a couple of words: come and take them. For 3 brutal days, those 300 Spartans hold off what feels like the entire world crashing down on them. That fight becomes the most legendary last stand in human history. Most folks have seen the movie and think they know the story, but Hollywood twisted almost everything. The real truth is even more unbelievable. This is what really happened with Leonidas and the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, and it all begins long before the battle ever starts with one big question. How did Sparta build the most feared warriors who ever lived? To understand the 300, you've got to understand Sparta itself. This wasn't a normal city by any stretch. It was a full-blown warrior society unlike anything the world had ever seen. From the moment a Spartan boy was born, elders inspected him. If he looked weak or sick, he was left out on a mountainside to die. Only the strong were allowed to live. By age 7, boys were taken from their families and thrown into the agoge, Sparta's brutal military training system. For the next 13 years, their whole world revolved around one thing: learning how to fight. They were purposely fed just enough to survive so they'd be forced to steal food. If they got caught stealing, the punishment wasn't for stealing itself, but for being sloppy enough to get caught. They slept on beds made from reeds they gathered with their own bare hands. They trained barefoot in every kind of weather. They were taught to speak in short, sharp phrases, which is where we get the word laconic from Laconia, the region Sparta came from. By the time a Spartan man turned 20, he officially joined the army. Even then, he still wasn't allowed to live with his wife until he hit 30. The military ruled every part of his life. On the battlefield, Spartans fought in a formation called the phalanx. Men packed in shoulder to shoulder, shields locked together, spears aimed forward, forming what looked like an unstoppable wall of bronze and iron. That formation only worked if every man held his ground. One weak link could bring the whole line crashing down. Spartan lines didn't break. They had been trained since childhood to believe that dying was better than retreating. Spartan mothers would tell their sons before battle, "Come back with your shield or on it," meaning you either return victorious or you don't return at all. There was no backup plan, no middle ground. That was the world Leonidas was born into. He came into this life around 540 BC as a Spartan prince, but he wasn't the one destined for the throne. He had 2 older brothers ahead of him. Just like every other Spartan boy, he was sent into the agoge at age 7 and put through the same harsh training as everyone else. Nobody expected him to be king, but life had a different path picked out for him. His oldest brother died without leaving behind an heir. His second brother ended up accused of treason and was forced to flee Sparta. And just like that, around 490 BC, Leonidas found himself crowned king of Sparta at about 50 years old. He had spent his entire life as a warrior. Now he would lead them all. While all this was happening in Greece, a massive storm was building far to the east. The Persian Empire was rising fast, becoming the dominant superpower of the ancient world. Its borders stretched from India all the way to Egypt. The Persian king Darius I set his sights on adding Greece to that empire. In 490 BC, Persia made its move and invaded Greece. At Marathon, a small army of Athenians somehow pulled off the impossible and crushed the Persians against unbelievable odds. Persia pulled back, but nobody believed for a second that it was over. Darius died in 486 BC, and his son Xerxes took the throne. Along with the crown, he inherited his father's burning obsession with conquering Greece. For the next 4 years, Xerxes prepared what would become the largest invasion force the ancient world had ever seen. Ancient writers claimed his army topped 1,000,000 men. Modern historians think the real number was likely between 100,000 and 300,000. But either way, it was enormous, far bigger than anything Greece could ever hope to match. The Persian army was made up of fighters from every corner of the empire: Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Indians, and dozens of other nations. They brought cavalry, archers, and even war elephants. Xerxes himself watched from a golden throne as endless columns of soldiers marched toward Greece. On the sea, his fleet boasted more than 1,000 warships. Greece had never faced a threat like this. The Greek city-states rushed into an emergency meeting. Most leaders wanted to give up the north entirely and focus on defending the south. But Leonidas saw something different. He knew there was one place where the land itself could cancel out Persia's overwhelming numbers. Thermopylae. Its name literally means hot gates, because of the steaming hot springs nearby, was a tight coastal pass squeezed between the mountains and the sea. At its narrowest spot, it was barely 50 feet wide. That meant a small force could bottleneck and hold off a massive army if they played it right. Leonidas knew this was the spot. He told the council this was where they should make their stand. The council agreed in theory, but they wouldn't commit their full armies. A major religious festival was underway, and many of the city-states flat out refused to send their troops. Because of the holy period, Leonidas was only granted permission to take his personal guard, just 300 Spartan warriors. But those 300 men weren't picked at random. Leonidas chose only warriors who already had living sons. He knew exactly what this mission really was, a one-way trip. If these men were going to die, he wanted to make sure they left children behind to carry on their bloodlines. With that decision made, the 300 Spartans marched north toward Thermopylae. As they moved through Greece, other city-states started adding their own soldiers to the force. By the time they reached Thermopylae, the Greek army had grown to around 7,000 men. Still, everyone knew who the backbone of this defense really was. The heart of the line, the warriors who would take the full impact, were the 300 Spartans. When Xerxes finally arrived at Thermopylae and saw how small the Greek force was, he couldn't believe they actually planned to fight. He sent a scout to check them out. What the scout reported back sounded almost unbelievable. The Spartans were calmly stretching, exercising, and even combing their hair. Xerxes didn't understand what he was seeing. A Greek advisor explained it to him plainly. Spartans groom their hair before battle when they know they're preparing to die. Xerxes decided to give them one last chance. He sent a messenger with a simple offer: hand over your weapons. Leonidas sent back his now famous answer, Molin Labe, which means come and take them. Those two words would echo through history as one of the greatest symbols of defiance ever spoken. Xerxes waited 4 days, convinced the Greeks would lose their nerve and run. They never moved an inch. On the 5th day, he finally ordered the attack. Wave after wave of Persian soldiers surged into the narrow pass. But the Spartans, locked into perfect formation, cut them down without mercy. In that tight space, the Persians couldn't use their massive numbers. Only a handful of men could fight on the front line at any moment, and those unlucky few were facing the deadliest warriors on earth. The soldiers in the back kept pushing forward, forcing their own men straight into Spartan spears. Before long, bodies began to stack up. The Persians finally pulled back for a moment. That's when Xerxes sent in his prized fighters, the Immortals, 10,000 of the finest warriors Persia had to offer. These men had a reputation for never being beaten, and they stormed into that narrow pass with pure confidence. It didn't matter. The Spartans shattered them just like the rest. The Immortals broke ranks and ran. It said Xerxes leapt up from his golden throne 3 different times in disbelief as he watched his best troops get torn apart by this tiny Greek force. By the end of the first day, thousands of Persians were dead, and they hadn't gained a single foot of ground. On the 2nd day, Xerxes tried all over again. More attackers poured into the pass. More Persian bodies hit the ground. The Greek line never gave way. Leonidas kept rotating his fighters, letting the allied troops recover while keeping the 300 Spartans fresh and deadly. The wall of defense might as well have been solid stone. The Persians simply couldn't break through. But Xerxes still had one card left to play: information. A Greek traitor named Ephialtes slipped into the Persian camp and offered up a deadly secret. There was a hidden mountain trail that curved around Thermopylae. For the right price, he would lead the Persians straight behind the Greek position. Xerxes jumped at the chance. Under cover of darkness, he sent the Immortals, rebuilt after their humiliation, along with thousands of other troops, up that mountain path. Leonidas had posted about 1,000 Phocian Greeks to guard that trail. But when the Persians attacked at dawn, those defenders pulled back to higher ground instead of holding the pass. Just like that, the Persians were behind the Greek lines. Word reached Leonidas quickly. The enemy had flanked them, and total encirclement was only moments away. Leonidas didn't hesitate. He ordered most of the Greek allies to retreat while they still had a chance to live. Nearly 6,000 men turned and fled south. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans stayed right where they were. With them stood about 700 Thespians who refused to abandon the Spartans, and roughly 400 Thebans. In the end, around 1,400 Greeks chose to remain and face certain death. On the third day, knowing full well they weren't walking away alive, the Spartans fought with a level of fury that shook the battlefield. Ancient accounts say they surged beyond the narrow pass and charged into open ground, figuring if they were going to die, they'd take as many Persians with them as possible. They fought until their spears snapped in their hands. Then they switched to swords. When the swords broke, they kept fighting with bare hands and even their teeth. Somewhere in that storm of violence, King Leonidas finally fell. The Spartans closed ranks around Leonidas' body, forming a tight ring as they fought to protect their fallen king. One by one, they were cut down where they stood. In the end, the Persians didn't defeat them through skill or strength. They won through sheer numbers and endless arrows. They surrounded the last Spartans and rained death on them from a distance, because getting close meant dying. The last Spartan still standing was a man named Aristodemus. He hadn't been there for the final fight. Leonidas had sent him away earlier because of a serious eye infection. When Aristodemus made it back to Sparta alive instead of being welcomed, he was shamed. His people called him a coward for surviving while his brothers fell. A year later, at the Battle of Plataea, he fought with a reckless, almost suicidal fury, desperate to die with honor. By the end of that battle, his fellow Spartans said he had finally redeemed himself. Every single one of the original 300 Spartans died at Thermopylae. Xerxes was so furious over the losses his army had suffered that he ordered Leonidas' body be beheaded and displayed on a cross, one of the deepest insults in Greek culture. But in the end, Leonidas got exactly what he had come for. The 300 bought Greece time. The stand at Thermopylae allowed Athens to evacuate its people and prepare its navy. Just a few months later, at the Battle of Salamis, the Greek fleet shattered the Persian navy. The following year, at Plataea, the Greek armies crushed what was left of Persia's land forces. Xerxes fled back to Persia, his great invasion defeated. Greece stayed free, and in many ways, Western civilization was saved. After the war, the Greeks raised a monument at Thermopylae with words written by the poet Simonides. The inscription said, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws we lie." And just like that, the 300 Spartans became legend. Their sacrifice lit a fire in Greece. Their story has echoed across 2,500 years of history. Military academies still study Thermopylae. Even today, the word Spartan still means disciplined, tough, and fearless. And Leonidas' reply, "Molin Labe," is still used as a symbol of resistance against tyranny. The movie 300 made their story famous all over again for a new generation, but it changed a lot of details. The real 300 weren't alone. They had around 7,000 allies at the start. The Spartans didn't fight shirtless with capes at first. They wore heavy bronze armor. Ephialtes probably wasn't horribly deformed like the movie showed, and Xerxes wasn't some towering, pierced giant. He was just a normal-sized Persian king. But for all the changes, Hollywood did get the spirit right. 300 men willing to die to protect their home, standing against impossible odds without fear, holding the line when anyone else would have run. That part was real. The Battle of Thermopylae still teaches a lesson that time can't erase. Courage and sacrifice can change the course of history. Numbers don't always decide the outcome. Sometimes a small group of people who refuse to back down can accomplish what entire armies cannot. The 300 Spartans proved that being willing to die for something greater than yourself can move nations and inspire generations. Their stand at Thermopylae didn't just save Greece. It protected the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and Western thought. If Persia had conquered Greece, the world we know today might not exist. There might be no democracy, no Olympic Games, no teachings from Socrates, Plato, or Aristotle. Leonidas and the 300 knew they were walking into death. They went anyway. They held the line. And more than 2,500 years later, we're still telling their story.